Good morning. My name is Alexander Smith, and I am a student in Old Testament Survey History and Literature. This is being recorded for my professor, Dr. Tony Caffey. And what we'll be discussing this morning is a dynamic character um, in the book of First Samuel, or the first chapters in First Samuel 1 through 7. Um, just to give a brief synopsis and an overview of what is happening in these chapters. Before we get started, just kind of want to let you guys know what resources that I use. So, of course, from Logos, I use the Baker Encyclopedia, and that is written, of course, by Walter Ewell and Barry Bitzel. And that encyclopedia gave me some insight just with a little bit of brief history of who Eli was. Now, believe it or not, there's not a lot on Eli. You would think that it would be more, but he is significant. Also, from Sheffield Academic Press. They had a book called Historical Books. It's edited by a J. Sherrill Exum. And I also pulled some things from there. And then lastly, great characters of the Bible. Dr. Allen B. Stringfellow, who would have knew, right? Read this book back years ago. It's like a kid book almost, but it's pretty good because it does give you some insight of some great characters, and it doesn't in this book necessarily talk about Eli, but it does talk about Samuel and Hannah. And by talking about Samuel and Hannah, you get a lot of insight into Eli. So at this moment, I want to dive into this brief synopsis of what we have going on here. So we were challenged with four things. How does the character that you chose, which my character is Eli, contribute to the overarching plot of the narrative? The next thing we were challenged with was, are they static or dynamic characters? And then also we were told to describe their interaction with the other characters, including God. Lastly, how is the author using the character to impact the reader? Okay, so let's give a brief synopsis real quick of these first seven chapters. Now, what we're seeing here is we're getting a brief look at several Old Testament characters. These first couple of characters have several. These first couple several chapters have several different themes, and this is coming out of the academic press, Sheffield Press book. And from these themes, there are many different topics that you can use for your life application. However, it appears that the driving force of these chapters show us Israel moving from a theocracy to an autocracy. God ruled Israel, and we can see that he even tried to wake Israel up by letting them be judged. This is where you get the book of Judges from. Okay, now we're kind of shifting some things, right? However, after everything God did, Israel still wanted a king like the other nations. Now, we haven't actually got to that yet through these first seven chapters, but because we're reading this and we've read the Bible, we kind of see the setup of what's going on, right? These chapters shift us into God's new work of rulership, which is from priest to prophet, right? And then a prophet king type of system that he'll be using. So we begin to see the grooming of Samuel and him judging Israel, because Samuel for a moment is going to become the person who judges Israel, and then we're going to see this prophet king relationship later with Samuel and Saul. But right now, we just want to focus on Eli. But I just want to give an overview of what's being set up. Okay, so Eli, how does he contribute to the overarching plot? Well, it's simple. Eli is a high priest, and he does have a connection with God. Now, what we know about Eli, we don't really know a lot. We know that Eli is introduced in First Samuel, um, chapters 1, 9 through 18. And it is clear that he is a priest. but he is also a judge. We don't have a direct lineage of Eli, but if he's a priest, then we're going to assume that he comes from the line of Aaron. All right, basically a Levite. We also find out in these chapters that he and his sons are governing Israel from the location of Shiloh. And that's kind of cited right here from Alan B. Stringfellow. And his sons Hophni and Phinehas. These are his two sons, and they're governing Israel together. But the overarching plot is really about Samuel, right? And Samuel becoming this great prophet, one of the greatest prophets, right? And he's also instrumental. He's the one who picks Saul. And he's also the one who dethrones Saul, and he's also the one who picks David later. And David, of course, we know is a man after God's own heart. And this is actually the line that Jesus Christ comes through, right? He comes through that line of David. But going back to Samuel and why Eli is important, Eli's the guy who's going to groom Samuel, right? Now, Samuel is dedicated, right, by Hannah to God. And she basically being that I'm not really covering her, but just to say in a nutshell, she actually prays to have a child because she wanted a child, that it was a son. And once she had it, she gave God her word that she would not cut the hair on his head, and that she would dedicate him straight to God. And she gave her son to Eli, and Eli begins to groom him. So one of the second questions that I asked is he a dynamic or static character? I would have to say, by looking at everything here in my notes, that he was more of a static character. Although the character has critical impact to these chapters, mainly because he becomes the guardian of Samuel, who becomes a great prophet one day. Eli himself seems to be a static character. From the time he's introduced until his death, I don't see a shift in his character. So it's not like, you know, Joseph, kind of like a little bratty kid picking with his brothers, gets sold into slavery, becomes a great governor, right? You don't really see that. You see Eli kind of just being Eli, right? I don't really see too much of a shift, and you don't have a lot of information about Eli. I mean, you're kind of putting some things together, right? So I don't think he's a dynamic character in the fact that you see this incredible change, but I do think he's a static character, and he's a very important character. Also, how is his interaction? Well, if you kind of watch it, when we're watching Eli, right? When we first see Eli, you would assume that he is highly judgmental. Now, kind of basing this on my notes and reciting from Baker's Encyclopedia, you think he's highly judgmental. He assumes Hannah for being drunk. And Hannah's praying, and he's kind of reading her lips, and he's perceiving this wrong. However, he moves to compassion, right? After he has an understanding that she wants a child, but a boy, and he blesses Hannah. Kinda is blessing that, that God does that for her. Now here's the issue. He has two corrupt sons, Hophni and Phinehas, and they seem not to be disciplined at all by Eli, right, for their corrupt behavior. He lacks the discipline of these two young men that happen to be his sons, right? His lack of discipline can show that his interaction with his boys might have been lackluster, so it might not have been a great interaction with him and his sons. Oddly enough, he seems to have discernment and a positive relationship with God. We kind of see that Eli was able to assure Samuel that it was God's voice that he was hearing from. And from this narrative, he treated Samuel like a son. So it doesn't seem as if though he was a bad guy. It doesn't seem that his relationship with his sons were great. Seemed as if though when it came to people, he as a priest, he tried to be humble. And he knew who God was, right? That's the big thing. He knew who God was, and it also seems as if he could understand God's voice. He could discern it. And when Samuel thought that it was Eli that was calling him, and Eli kind of was like, "No, that's not me." But he kind of coached him. If you hear that again, he kind of said, "Hey, man, if you're hearing that, you're hearing from God, and that's not an odd thing, right? To hear from God." So he kind of made him feel real comfortable with that. Um, Eli, just like many other characters in the Bible, has a very odd signature. It seems as if though the author, right, was trying to show you that you can have a discerning relationship with God but still won't put division between you and your family, right? It seems as if that's the narrative, right? Even when we get to the New Testament, Jesus kind of addressed that when he talks about bringing in division, right? Eli's sons acted so foul, and not seeing Eli discipline speaks to who Eli really was, right? It speaks to the heart of Eli, who he really was. Did he do a great thing by taking in Samuel? He did, but he also totally disrespected the religious center, the obligation he had as a priest, who God called him to be. He kind of tarnished that by allowing his sons to be corrupt. Like I said, you don't get a lot of information from Eli, but what you do get to see in the overview is no matter how good your works are, right? There is still a dynamic of where you have to separate and shift into what God is actually calling you to do. Now, he did that, but there were some things that he still struggled with in that relationship with his son. His sons, I do believe, caused him, not to have the legacy that he could have had. So basically, each question has been answered. I hope that that gives you a overview of exactly who Eli was in the Bible. It actually summarizes the gist of things of actually how he operated. Um, I do appreciate you tuning in. Thank you for tuning in. And I just pray that you have yourself a great day and take care. Bye.